Hi, welcome to my Psychic Manifesto. I'm your host, Ian Pekrul. This is a talk show dedicated to exploring the work of Jane Roberts and a body of literature known as the Seth material. Today, we have back on the show Barrie Gellis, one of the New York boys, friend of the author, Jane Roberts, and Seth referred to Barrie Gellis as our poet. Barrie, welcome back to my Psychic Manifesto. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So today, I wanted to talk to you. One of the things that Seth really stressed was the idea of spontaneity. And I asked you before the show started, hey, Barrie, what do you want to talk about? And you had kind of said, I don't know. I don't want to think about it too much. Just let things come up. Being spontaneous or following your instincts, a lot of other schools of thought would have you really show like a lot of rigid discipline and, denial of the flesh and purging and, life is a veil of tears. That wasn't Seth's take on the nature of reality at all. Could you talk a little bit about how the Seth material Seth approached the idea of spontaneity?
Sure, yeah, spontaneity. He said also spontaneity knows its own discipline. When people first hear about be spontaneous, the initial response, maybe reasonable based on what they know, is do whatever you want. Just, kill, murder, just whatever you feel like doing. And then he said, don't do what isn't fun. If it's fun, stop. If it's not fun, stop doing it. And that could be, well, if I have fun beating up my neighbor or my kid, I'll just do it because I find it fun. It knows its own discipline. There are things in place that don't just allow that to happen. And I don't mean that in any kind of weird way. I mean, our nature of love, compassion, and goodness is fighting against that. So being spontaneous means trust your instincts, do what you feel like doing, what you want to do, but also being aware of when something inside is telling you, don't. That would be what with natural guilt, the violations and natural guilt thing. But the more we are spontaneous, the more we start acting in harmony with our nature, which is love, compassion, and goodness. Acting in harmony with our nature is fun or joyful. And then when you start in what's naturally in our nature is to help and not harm others. It's something we must do, not because it's forced upon us, but because that's our nature. Not the only thing to do. You don't sacrifice your whole life just doing that because then you'd hate everybody. But when you're spontaneous, it's really trusting yourself. That's what being spontaneous means. Trust yourself, which doesn't really mean just do whatever you want. It means trust yourself. If you want to do something, just trust yourself if it's something you should or shouldn't do. It's not, don't ignore yourself and do whatever you want because you're being spontaneous. So I would sum it up as being spontaneous is simply trusting yourself. And it has a purpose. The purpose is to get in touch with your nature of love, compassion, and goodness. And the purpose of that is to finally learn that lesson along with you create your own reality and leave the reincarnational cycle behind and move on to other realms. So that's how I would talk about, not that how I will talk about, that is how I did talk about spontaneity. That was my...
Besides, following your passion, one of the, I also wanted to ask you about what you thought, when you say follow your passion, that's something one of the other Bashar talks a lot about.
I'm going to stop just for a minute. I'm sorry. I didn't say follow your passion. I said trust yourself.
When you said that, what came up in me is the idea of like following your passion.
Follow your passion would be a part of it, but it's also everyday behavioral decisions and other things. Yeah, so I would say follow your passion as well. I just want to point out that's not what I said. I said trust yourself, but I'll talk about follow your passion if you want.
Well, what do you think of some of the other, let's go to something else. What do you think? There's a lot of other channeled material out there. You were interviewed several times by Kevin Moore on his show. He's an excellent interviewer, and he's done a long series. I think he's interviewed close to 50 people. He interviewed you, he interviewed Rick Stacks, he interviewed a lot of people on the whole idea of channeling. It's becoming more and more popular. What do you think of some of the other people these days doing channeling?
Well, I don't mean in a bad sense when I'm going to say that. I don't think much about it. Not that I think little of it. I think that there are, tons of, I don't know, I never weighed Seth, so I don't know how much he weighs, but I think there are tons of entities out there that, that has, like Jane and Rob had their connection to Seth. Other people have their connections. They're all trying to get across the same message, in different ways, using that person's belief system or how much that person could free themselves from that and that person's vocabulary. So, and everybody needs a different message because they're not ready. Some people might be ready for Abraham's message. A lot of people, Seth people, kind of put down Abraham. They may put down Seth, and then there's Elias. The guy Emmanuel, a little bit I read is pretty good. But in any case, but everybody's, needs their teacher. I'm putting that word teacher in quotes because I don't like to look at these people as teachers. But everybody needs that, the person that makes sense to them, that they could relate to. Now, what I do personally, this is for my own self, to judge the quality of the person, is I do use Seth as a gauge or a guide. And one of the things I do look at is the idea of violations of natural guilt. If they include that, what they say also about physical reality, because Seth is very physical reality is as spiritual as non-physical reality, is a biological spirituality to that, and our soul and flesh. And there might be, and there probably is, a couple of other things like that. So that's how I use, now if it's my personal take on judging them, and we judge everything, people look at judging, oh, you can't judge that. That's how we know how we're creating our reality, what we're attracting or not. We have to judge, like the people we're attracting or the situations we're in. So judging isn't the problem. We judge if it's going to rain. Being judgmental is, in your judgment, putting other people down, like they're inferior and I'm superior. That's something different. But just making judgments is, you have to judge things, or else you wouldn't know what you're doing. Anyway, so my personal judging of them is, I don't think there is, I don't know, as good as Seth is. I think there's more distortion or whatever. But I know they could think that about Seth at the same time. There was one person in my research I came across. His name was Davis. Jefferson Davis. I forget his first name. It was like a Southern type name, but his name was Davis, and they called him the seer of Poughkeepsie. Poughkeepsie happens to be pretty near Elmira, also in upstate New York.
Yeah. His
material, and he was doing this thing like from before the Civil War up until about 1905. And he dictated books. He did a lot of question and answers in front of audiences that someone transcribed that, and he has books, the Q&A books on that. His material was the closest to Seth's material than and any of these others, although Emmanuel, I thought at different times was pretty good. But instead, like Seth had framework 1 and 2, Davis talked about sphere 1, like a sphere 1 and sphere 2. He had something that was his equivalent to natural guilt and violations. And no one else had those two things today or other places that I saw. But so again, he spoke in his own kind of vocabulary, because he used sometimes religious terms, Christian terms, but they had nothing to do with the religious definitions. So you got to read what he meant by them. Like, it just had nothing. I don't remember the details now. But when he spoke about the Father, or whatever it was, he did the 10 Commandments. He had his own 10 Commandments that fit the Seth material perfectly. So he wasn't talking about the 10 Commandments, but some of his stuff was couched in that language, but he doesn't mean it. He doesn't mean it in those ways at all. Because if you read a little bit, he says, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking in that manner. So that's someone that I never met anyone who heard of, but he's online. Yeah, I mean, you could find books or stuff, those free old books that you can get for free. And again, but the other mediums or people, if somebody enjoys them, they should listen to them. I personally, I wasn't even searching for Seth. And I'm not going to try to, if I don't even feel the need to, I think I have enough going inside my mind, and everything Seth said was so encompassing. So I'm not looking for anybody else. I just don't feel the need. I've never seen anything that somebody said that wasn't what Seth said also. Anything new, I haven't seen. And all these people who said, oh, Seth is now communicating through them because he has to continue the material. They've never come up with anything or anything new at all. So that's my answer about the other mediums. More power to them. But then, sometimes I'm interested when I hear it's a little angle is interesting. But that's about all, everybody should find like potato chips settling in a bag. Everybody find their place.
Yes, Seth, nothing resonates with me the way the Seth material does. I've looked at some other authors. Seth cautions people not to try to jump from one system to another. I always encourage, I feel like I've hit bedrock when I started reading the Seth material, and nothing else resonates with me the way it does. But like you said, that's not to mean that it's not for everybody. And Seth really cautioned his readers, don't ever take the attitude that we have all the answers, or our group, I never claim to have all the answers. I can be a guide or a teacher, but the whole idea of the Seth material was lead you back to yourself. And, if you're asking the questions, you already have the answers. And, Seth was always, trying to introduce the reader to being, be your own authority.
Yeah. And ask yourself. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Are you still in touch with anybody, any of the New York boys? Do you still talk to Jeffrey or Rick Stacks or?
Sometimes, Ricky had those online conferences. And yeah, so I talked to him about those things. When I was in New York, we saw each other a little bit more. Now, when we have to, we speak. I don't like the phone that much, so I would write, email probably. It's Jeffrey also. Jeffrey works for Ricky on that Seth, whatever it's called, that Seth organization they have. Seth, whatever it's called, Seth Learning Center. When people want to buy books, order books or tapes, he's the one that usually answers the phone. And so if I have to, I'll speak to him. Sometimes things come up as the group of friends. So there might be something that comes up with that. But I'm not on any regular basis, like once a week, communicating with them.
Did you stay in touch? You said you went to classes, and then after a little while, you realized you didn't need them anymore. You were, did you stay in touch with Jane Roberts after that?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say, I'm a writer and an English teacher, so I nitpick words sometimes, so forgive me. But I don't think I felt I didn't need it anymore. Maybe I even said I didn't need it. I don't think so, but maybe I did. It wasn't a question of needing it or not needing it. It's more of a question of wanting it or not wanting it, because I thought I wanted to answer the questions myself. So so however that could be translated to not needing Seth, I don't know if I would have used that term. And if I did, then I'm challenging myself on that usage. So I decided I just was ready now to continue as I was before the year of class, and to ask myself. I stayed in touch with Jane through writing, yes. In Mary Dillman's stuff that you're going to interview Deb, who's now taken over for her. They have some correspondence that I wrote and she wrote back. I sent her poems. I was editor of some local poetry magazine. She sent me some poems for that. I wrote her a letter about Walt Whitman, because Walt Whitman had a lot of Sethian stuff in it. I mean, unbelievable. Now, Walt Whitman was alive when this guy Davis was alive. Andrew Jefferson Davis, or whatever his name was. So he had access to that material as well. And he used the word sphere too. But Walt Whitman was so close on so many things with Seth. And I wrote that to Jane, and Seth brought it up in class. Old class member, Barrie Gellis, wrote about Walt Whitman. And so, so I did stay in touch with Jane through writing various times. And sent her poems, talked about poems. And so, yes, and I stayed in touch with my friends because we were still the same group of friends, And over time, I think just as people get older, like we all lived in Queens, and then at some point people started moving like to the Bronx or to Brooklyn, and then even further away, we kind of lost touch in that way.
What is one of your favorite memories of Jane Roberts?
Favorite memories. Oh, I'll tell you one memory of Jane Roberts. I don't know if it's not my favorite one, but I remember um, two things. She once was talking about parents. I don't think she was talking about her parents. Maybe she was talking about her parents and how they did this and they weren't helpful or they were mean or something. And I said, well, at least they did the best they could do. They were tried the best. And she got upset. And she said, no, they don't know. They don't do the best they can do. They don't have to do. That's wrong. Now, knowing her background, she was writing a biography called Out of This Rich Bed. Maybe she was reading an excerpt from that. So I remember her twice. She got annoyed with me. That was one time saying, "Don't know," and it made me think about it, and I realized maybe on some level they're doing the best they can, but on the level she was speaking out, no, they didn't have to hit the kid, they didn't have to beat the child, they didn't have to sexually abuse the child, so they're not doing the best they can on a practical everyday level at all. But I had the idea of, well, they're trying. Your parents, they might. And anyway, and once I also told her I noticed I didn't know what it was at the time, but I think I figured out it was a centipede, and it looked like like this long, and it was coming out from a rug somehow, and it kind of scared me, and I killed it, and I said that in class, and she didn't take a liking to that, and I don't do things like that anymore. Like if there was once a spider in my house, I capture a cup and I'll throw them outside. I say if you're here and I have to, I get afraid because sometimes I get afraid that they're going to multiply. Like if something's pregnant and then there'll be, it's fear based, but I try my best to apologize if I kill them or to get them out of the house if possible. But she got mad at those two things. Otherwise, what I remember of Jane, as you said earlier at some point, she had maybe you said it about Seth, but it's about her. She was very intelligent. She had a great sense of humor. She listened. She was open minded. She was very liberal. Like she wasn't on the other side of the generation gap, even though she might have been 40 then, the old age of 40, and we were in our 20s. Uh, so that's how I remember loving, giving, friendly,
Yeah. I
happy in
remember
class.
it's funny you're talking about. I know she wrote a poem about an ant, like, please, like from the ant's perspective, thinking like, please don't step on me, I'd be happy to cross the street for you, that type of thing. One thing I always thought, I don't know if you'd call it strange. I mean, in my opinion, Jane Roberts also had her own books. This show is the title of my show, my Psychic Manifesto is a tribute to one of her books, God of Jane, A Psychic Manifesto. And the way her consciousness seems to have merged with Seth and the way she embraced and grew with the ideas in the Seth material. If you look at her early writings, like the first book she wrote, which had a lot of her notes, the Seth material, she was kind of skeptical about a lot of these ideas. And then towards the end, she was writing her own books like the Oversoul 7 series, and then later, like, The Adventures in Consciousness and God of Jane. You're talking about, she was upset about, hey, don't, try not to kill these, don't step on an ant. Isn't it true? But she wasn't a vegetarian. Jane and
Yeah,
Rob both ate meat. Is that correct?
I believe so. But getting back to what you said, it wasn't like at first she was this one way with writing Seth Speaks. Then at the end, she was another way. Totally, when Seth first came through, she had she didn't had no deep trust in what it was because she didn't believe in reincarnation, for example, and she was writing a book about ESP for some magazine or something. So she was open to explore it, and they found out on their own how it was great material and interesting, and Seth was valid according to them. And when Seth started coming through, I don't know. I mean, coming through for the books because he started a Ouija board and then she started speaking for him, but she had to pace around. Then she calmed down and she was able to sit down and talk with Seth. And they had like 490 let's say 500 sessions, starting number one with the Ouija board to 500. It's about 507, but let's say 500. And those were in the early sessions. And then the next session, let's say after session 500, session 501, that was the first session of Seth Speaks, the first official book. And then those book dictations came. And then the personal sessions, which were the deleted sessions, those were things they took out of the book sessions because they didn't fit the book, but it was still material. So those became, at first they were calling them the deleted sessions. Now they're called the personal sessions. There's about 7 books of that. But when she started speaking for Seth, and I can't speak for her, but when she started, the books were coming through with her. I think she pretty much was in touch with Seth and what was going on. I don't know how much that changed over the years from getting the Seth material dictated to getting the last books dictated. I believe basically she had a real excellent relationship, not like, you're going out on a date, but a relationship with Seth and who he was and where he was. There were certain things she might have been upset about at the beginning, which I don't remember, topics or whatever. I don't know what. So she always had this great interaction with Seth. And she's always there. Now with Seth too, that's different in only that Seth too is to, generally speaking, Seth too is to Seth what Seth is to us. Seth too is so removed from physical reality and was never physical that he couldn't reach Jane. Seth had to go like halfway, wherever that is, and he would come the other half. And then Seth would like translate for Jane, or maybe he was a medium for Seth too. So Seth would translate for Seth too, say it to Jane, and then Jane would then say it like as Seth too. So Seth too, to us, like our whole physical reality is like Saturday afternoon, and he was never physical, as I said. So if anybody ever tells you, and I've heard people say, well, like there's Seth, and then there's Seth is Seth 1, and then there's a Seth 2, and Seth 3, and they're just like a chronological order of Seths. That's absurd. It's like saying, the Richter scale with earthquakes. I don't know if you know it, but like one earthquake is 10 times stronger than the next. But so a 1 on the scale is much different than a 2 on the scale. It's like 100 times stronger or 10. And then a 3 is 10 or 100 times stronger than that. It's not like a number 1 earthquake is just the first earthquake, and the next earthquake is 2. Number 2 on the scale, and number 3 on the scale. So Seth 2 is not just simply, another Seth or the next Seth. Seth 2 is something totally different from Seth. And Seth says he doesn't understand it that well, but he tries. And he couldn't even reach Jane. So he's not going to be reaching, somebody, anybody. I'm sorry. So they were getting back to your original question. Jane and Seth, again, this isn't I'd say in quotes, not in quotes, but not in a bad way. This is an ignorant thing I'm saying, just meaning that I don't really know. But I believe that their relationship, their closeness, the way they got along didn't get better as time went on. Or I think they reached a point, maybe it deepened like friends deepen the more you're together or something. But there was a big change between coming through at the beginning, coming through the Ouija board, and even when she started speaking to him and all the early sessions, when they were questioning, am I going insane? Jane questioning, what is this? Is it what it says? Is this just my subconscious? They went through a lot of testing with envelopes and what's inside the envelope. And so after those testings were finished, I think that was like they left a certain area behind of questioning. They now accepted Seth and what he said. And then what and how things grew in their understanding of each other, I don't know, but I think it was pretty much established, at that point on. And it's heartbreaking, the last book. That's why it was difficult to read when Jane is dying in it, and Seth is trying to give her advice, and you don't have to do, I'm paraphrasing, you don't have to do this, you could change the direction of it. And, but Jane couldn't get over her childhood. She was an abused child.
Yeah.
And that's why she got so upset at me when I said, they love you. They just do their best. But she couldn't get over those ideas of the sinful self and that she was bad. And she brought that into her adulthood. And that's what eventually, in my opinion, I think I read it also, led to her negative beliefs about herself, which led to the disease and dying. Although the disease served a purpose, a positive purpose. It kept her at her desk so she could write. It served other things. But one of them was, it was tied into her childhood beliefs that she couldn't, like we can. If you have a certain strong belief, you can't just turn it off. Remember, Jane was a person like us. Seth material came through her, but when it came to her as Jane, she wasn't had any more ability of changing beliefs or doing anything than any other person. So she tried her best. But we probably read the material more than her. She did, because she's busy giving it.
Yeah, she said Jane Roberts and her husband Robert had both said they really didn't have the luxury of studying the material. Jane would go into trance, and her husband, Robert Butts, would take shorthand notes. He didn't record a lot of the sessions for book dictation. And then he would spend a lot of his time typing up those notes into transcripts, which are preserved in the Stern Library at Yale. And Deb is going to be on the show, and she'll tell us about, it's called the Jane Roberts Papers. But yeah, Jane and Rob said they didn't really have the same luxury of working with the Seth material as it came out. Yeah. And you said in class, when you were going to class in Elmira, New York, as Jane, a lot of the times what you would use, you were using the nature of personal reality. Jane would come to class with, okay, this is, what Seth gave us in book.
Let me interrupt.
Sorry.
It wouldn't be used in class. Sometimes she would read a paragraph from it, or she would have somebody read something from it. It was not like a textbook or in any way something like, we're going to focus on this book because this book is coming out. Not at all. No. We focused on what people said, and class members, what Seth said, maybe what was said the time before, because the students there, unlike on Seth boards, you could say anything. You would bring up any topic. You could talk about what you wanted to talk about. There was never, oh, you can't talk about that. That doesn't relate to Seth. That's not the Seth material, which they say on Seth boards a lot, the Facebook Seth boards, or too much to my liking. So most of the thing was what people brought up. And it could have tied in. Obviously, it ties into the Seth concepts, which would tie into things he was writing at the time. But there was no focus on, okay, where are we up to now in the Seth, the Seth Personal Reality book. Here now, let's do session 210. So that didn't occur. And remember, I'm not saying remember, you know this probably, the amazing discipline to do this for, I don't know how many years they actually did those book dictations, about twice a week, and those classes, handwriting it and typing it up. Basically they took breaks, but I think there was twice a week. They did the book session, and then they had the class sessions. It is amazing discipline, amazing that they had that within them, that desire, that passion, and the awareness of how important it was to stick to it. I mean, I might do something, and then after a month, I go, yeah. I want to eat.
I'm sure it was the labor of love for both of them. Barrie, thank you so much for being on the show. We're out of time. I would love to have you as a recurring guest on the show. Thank you. And, Barrie, from one black sheep to another, I salute you.
Okay, thank you. And anytime, I'm happy to do your show. Anytime you want, you can just ask me. We'll arrange a time, which doesn't exist, and then we'll just do it.
Barrie, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you again to our viewers. This is, as I say, as Seth used to end a lot of his classes, the experiment continues. Good night. Thank you.
Whisper in the darkness as the December sun goes down, breeze blowing around your feet as you stumble from the ground. The secrets in the moving dust, know why your heart still beats. The stairs leading from the house onto the sacred street.